Thank you very much, Sam, for that introduction, and Lynn for inviting me to talk tonight. Man, that dancing was incredible. I'm not going to dance, but I did wear some bright-colored shoes to keep me energized. Tonight, I would like to traverse a tentative and provisional set of ideas regarding cities and their relationship to violence and peace. To understand the city in relation to questions of violence and peace, it is useful to consider how military cultures typically think of the city. To quote a writer named Bill Millard, warrior castes and guerrilla movements in nation after nation have defined themselves in terms of rustic purity, in contrast to the heterogeneity and hedonism found in urban centers. So, for instance, the Wahhabi nomad, Nazi Judeophobe, and Maoist cadre all share a tendency to view cities and their residents as polluted, decadent, and effeminate, and probably in need of some cleansing fire. Geographers, historians, and architects increasingly use the term urbicide to describe acts of violence that are specifically aimed at the physical structures and social milieus of the city. An example of urbicide is the Khmer Rouge's treatment of all Cambodian cities, but most famously Phnom Penh. In the early 1970s, Phnom Penh was a bustling metropolis. In 1975, the Khmer Rouge forcibly evacuated all its residents, leaving it entirely deserted. Under Pol Pot's regime, Cambodians were divided into two classes of people, old people and new people. Old people were the more trusted rural inhabitants, and new people the former city inhabitants. Their very cityness qualifying them for extra suspicion, scrutiny, and ultimately disposability. What could be called the tragic poster child of urbicide is Sarajevo at the hands of militant Serbian nationalists. Despite the cliches of Balkanization, Sarajevo functioned as an exceptionally pluralistic city for centuries. Its physical form, that of ethnic enclaves radiating around a collective central shared marketplace, has been described by numerous scholars as an embodiment, a physical embodiment of intercultural exchange. This diversity, this plurality, was deeply resented by Serbian nationalism in their efforts to kind of purify and cleanse. And from 1992 to 1996, it was systematically destroyed in the longest siege of any capital city in modern history. When you look at the tactics of the siege, it's incredibly disturbing and shocking, the degree to which places that served as mixing chambers for different ethnicities and different classes of people were systematically and specifically targeted, and often in very bizarre and perverse manners, such as building covert kind of camouflaged elevator shafts that were designed to remove, not only to destroy, the building wouldn't only be destroyed, but you would remove the evidence of cultures, different groups mixing together. Moving closer to the present, the 9/11 attacks were orchestrated, at least mythically, from the absolute other of the city, that of the cave. But they also involve professional city makers turned city destroyers. Osama bin Laden is said to have studied civil engineering, and Mohammed Atta, the pilot of the first plane to hit the World Trade Center towers, was an architect and held a master's degree in urban planning. This is the cover page from his thesis. And in this thesis, Atta argues strenuously against the transformative effects of modern urbanization and its damage to traditional Islamic neighborhoods. The high-rise tower is specifically targeted in his academic work, and it is tempting to see within his role in 9/11 at least some literal architectural and urbanist agenda at work. Various scholars have also described the United States military as distinctly rural, both in its geography, in terms of where it's located, populated, and its ideology. The US military, for instance, tends to be populated by people from non-urban environments. These are the 15 states with the highest inscription levels, and they happen to be very low in urbanization. Quite simply, city dwellers tend to enroll in the military less. Urban theorist Stephen Graham from England has identified the anti-urban rhetoric that increasingly pervades US military training and doctrine, and the ways that it surprisingly approximates an organization like Al-Qaeda's anti-urbanist views. So if a consideration of warrior culture ideology conveys its anti-urbanisms, it also, and I think this is the very important point, suggests its inverse, and that is that cities themselves may function as engines of peace. So what to make of this in relation to the fact that we are currently living in what is called the urban age? That is that in 2007, for the first time in human history, more people are now living in cities than in rural settings, with a dramatic worldwide acceleration of dense urbanity from Shanghai to Vancouver. Through the work of a range of institutions and individual researchers, it is now coming into focus that not only are we living in an age of unprecedented urbanity, but also of unprecedented peacefulness, despite the works and efforts of militaristic cultures around the world. For instance, the Harvard psychologist Steven Pinker has an exhaustive new book out that meticulously details the decline over centuries of violence of all types: murder, rape, genocide, and war. It's a fascinating book, and I encourage everyone to get it. This is a graph from his book showing the decline in battle deaths from both interstate and civil wars from 1946 to 2008. And this is another graph from the book showing the decline in genocide deaths covering the same period. And I could have chosen many other kind of numerical analysis of different types of violences in different times of different cultures from different periods over human history. Now, while the reasons for this historically unprecedented peacefulness are, of course, complex and numerous, ranging from the interconnectivity of global economies to the rise of democratic nation-states, but I would like to suggest that it might not be a coincidence that as the number of people living in cities has increased, that violence of all types has gone down. So much so that we might begin to talk about not Pax Romanas, Pax Britannicas, Pax Americanas, but through the proliferation of cities throughout the world that we can talk about a Pax Metropolitana, the metropolitan peace. Now, this is not to say or suggest that all is well in the city. The story of the urban age is also a tale of the proliferation of slums, the decline of truly public civic space, and the ongoing uptick in the slippery avatars of disciplinary society. But to see the liberating potentials of cities as empathic, peace-enhancing devices that can facilitate intercultural exchange between different subject identities, be they ethnic, sexual, class-based, or other, can influence our decisions on how to design and construct the cities of the future. From this vantage point, and to return to the here and now of Vancouver, a city whose recent urbanism is celebrated worldwide as an example of livability, we should ask ourselves, to what degree is this livable form, or what degree does this livable form enable the proliferation of pronounced differences, and their, by necessity, messy but vital exchanges? It is from this vantage point that being livable seems like a very low ambition, and one that favors a comfortable but homogeneous social life. We might instead shift our view to ask how Vancouver can occupy a positive position within Pax Metropolitana. And here I will conclude. Paradoxically, this is probably a Vancouver that more enthusiastically embraces conflict and antagonism as a necessary component of democratic urban life. And as the architect and my former teacher and boss, Rem Koolhaas, declares in his reflection on urban form that celebrates a proliferation of difference, each block of the city is an architectural city-state, each so ideologically different that they are not at war, but productively, gloriously, and peacefully, potentially so. Thank you.